In July 1841, the body of a young woman was found floating in the Hudson River near New York City. She had been brutally murdered. Her name was Marie Roget, and she was a beautiful tobacco shop clerk, known as the Beautiful Cigar Girl. Her death became a media sensation, and newspapers covered every gruesome detail. Theories flew, and the city was gripped by fear. 1 year later, Edgar Allan Poe, the master of mystery and macabre, published a story called The Mystery of Marie Roget. It was a thinly veiled account of Marie Roget's murder, transplanted to Paris and featuring Poe's detective C. Auguste Dupin. Poe claimed he could solve the real murder through pure logical deduction, just by reading newspaper accounts. But here is where things get weird. Some people have wondered whether Poe knew too much about the murder. Did he have inside information? Was he involved somehow? Did Edgar Allan Poe actually murder Marie Roget? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating true crime cases of the 19th century, the story behind Poe's least-known detective tale, and whether there's any truth to the conspiracy theory that Poe himself was the killer. Spoiler alert, the answer is going to surprise you. Let's start with the victim, because Marie Roget was famous long before she died. Mary Cecilia Roget was born around 1820 in Connecticut. By the time she was in her late teens, she was living in New York City with her mother Phoebe Roget, who ran a boarding house. Mary needed to work to help support the household, and in 1838, she took a job at John Anderson's tobacco shop on Broadway. Now, this wasn't just any tobacco shop. Anderson's Emporium was one of the most fashionable establishments in New York. It was a place where wealthy gentlemen, writers, artists, and politicians would come to buy cigars and tobacco. And Marie Roget wasn't just any clerk. She was, by all contemporary accounts, stunningly beautiful. Dark hair, expressive eyes, charming personality. Within months of working there, she became a local celebrity. Men would come to the shop just to see the beautiful cigar girl. Newspapers wrote about her. James Fenimore Cooper reportedly mentioned her in his writing. Washington Irving was said to be one of her admirers. Think of her as a 19th century influencer. She was famous for being famous, and her presence at Anderson's shop was essentially a marketing tool. The store became a must-visit destination, partly because of her. But in October 1838, something strange happened. Mary disappeared. For a week, no one knew where she was. Newspapers speculated. Had she been kidnapped, murdered, eloped? Then, just as mysteriously, she returned. She claimed she'd been visiting family in the country. Some people believed her. Others whispered about a secret affair or an abortion gone wrong. The incident blew over. Mary went back to work, though she eventually left Anderson's shop. By 1841, she was engaged to a man named Daniel Payne, a cork cutter who boarded at her mother's house. Life seemed to be settling into normalcy. And then, on July 25, 1841, Marie Roget disappeared again. This time, she wouldn't be coming back. On Sunday, July 25, 1841, Marie Roget told her fiancé Daniel Payne that she was going to visit her aunt who lived uptown. It was a hot summer day. She left the boarding house around 10 a.m., wearing a white dress and a bonnet. She never arrived at her aunt's house. In fact, her aunt later said she hadn't been expecting Mary at all. 3 days later, on July 28th, Mary's body was found floating in the Hudson River near Hoboken, New Jersey, by two men out for a walk. The discovery was horrific. Her body showed signs of extreme violence. Her face was bruised and battered. She had been choked to death. There was a piece of lace from her own petticoat tied tightly around her neck. Her dress was torn. There were signs of SA. A parasol, a handkerchief with the initials MR, and pieces of her clothing were found scattered in a nearby thicket in an area called the Sybil's Cave region of Hoboken. The coroner's report was graphic and widely published in newspapers, which was unusual for the time. This wasn't just a murder, it was a spectacle. The beautiful cigar girl, brutally killed. Theories exploded across New York. Theory 1, gang murder. Some believed Mary had been killed by one of the street gangs that roamed the Bowery and waterfront areas. Perhaps she rejected advances from gang members, or witnessed something she shouldn't have. Theory 2, a gentleman admirer. Others thought one of her wealthy admirers from the tobacco shop had lured her away, assaulted her, and killed her to silence her. Theory 3, an abortion gone wrong. This was whispered about more quietly, but some people believed Mary had been pregnant and died during an illegal abortion procedure, with her body dumped in the river to cover it up. The police investigation was a disaster. In 1841, there was no forensic science, no professional police detectives as we know them today. The New York police were corrupt, understaffed, and largely incompetent. They arrested several suspects, including her fiancé, Daniel Payne, a sailor who'd been seen with a woman matching Mary's description, and various gang members, but they couldn't make any charges stick. The newspapers, especially James Gordon Bennett's New York Herald, covered every salacious detail. They interviewed witnesses, published theories, and essentially conducted their own parallel investigation. The case became the O.J. Simpson trial of the 1840s. Everyone had an opinion, and the story dominated headlines for months. And then, in September 1841, something tragic happened. Daniel Payne, Mary's fiancé, was found dead near the same thicket where Mary's clothes had been discovered. He'd apparently poisoned himself with laudanum. Next to his body was a note that read, "Here I am on the spot. May God forgive me for my misspent life." Was this a confession? An expression of guilt for failing to protect her? Grief-induced suicide? No one knew. The case went cold. Mary Rogers' murderer was never found. And that's when Edgar Allan Poe entered the picture. By late 1841, Edgar Allan Poe was already a rising star in American letters. He had published The Murders in the Rue Morgue in April 1841, the first modern detective story ever written, featuring his analytical detective C. Auguste Dupin. Poe was fascinated by the Mary Rogers case. He followed the newspaper coverage obsessively. And he had an idea. What if he could solve a real murder using the same logical deduction methods his fictional detective used? In November 1842, more than a year after Mary's death, Poe began publishing The Mystery of Marie Roget in Snowden's Ladies' Companion magazine. The story was serialized over 3 issues, from November 1842 to February 1843. Here's what Poe did. He took the Mary Rogers case and relocated it to Paris, changing names but keeping every relevant detail. Mary Rogers became Marie Roget. The Hudson River became the Seine. New York became Paris. But the circumstances, the timeline, the physical evidence, it was all the same. In the story, Detective Dupin sits in his Paris apartment and reads newspaper accounts of the case. Through pure logical analysis, and by examining contradictions in witness statements, evaluating the likelihood of various scenarios, and applying reason, Dupin theorizes about what really happened to Marie Roget. Poe's conclusion? Marie was not killed by a gang. She was killed by a single person, likely a naval officer or someone connected to the maritime world. Furthermore, Poe theorized that she may have been involved in a secret relationship and possibly pregnant, and that her death may have been connected to an attempted abortion. But here's the fascinating part. Poe presented this as if Dupin's, and by extension. His own analysis was so logically sound that it must be correct. He essentially claimed he'd solved a real unsolved murder through armchair detection. In the original version of the story, Poe even included extensive footnotes analyzing the actual newspaper reports from the Mary Rogers case, directly critiquing the real journalist's reasoning and presenting his own theories as superior. It was an audacious literary experiment. Could fiction solve real crime through logic alone? The story was not Poe's most successful work. It's extremely long, filled with dense logical argumentation, and frankly, it's a bit dry compared to his other tales. Modern readers often find it tedious. But at the time, it caused a sensation because everyone knew it was really about Mary Rogers. And some people began to wonder, how did Poe know so much? Was he just reading newspapers? Or did he have inside information? So let's address the question directly. Did Edgar Allan Poe murder Mary Rogers? This conspiracy theory has floated around in various forms over the years. The reasoning usually goes something like this. 1. Poe was in New York at the time. True. Poe was living in Philadelphia in 1841, but had connections to New York and visited the city periodically. 2. Poe knew too much. Some theorists claim Poe's story contained details that weren't in the newspapers, suggesting inside knowledge. 3. Poe was obsessed with death and beautiful dead women. Also true, his work constantly features dead or dying women. Annabel Lee, Ligeia, Morella, The Fall of the House of Usher. He wrote, "The death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world." 4. Poe was mentally unstable. This is based on a largely false portrait painted by his rival Rufus Griswold, but the myth persists. 5. The timing is suspicious. Poe waited over a year to publish his story. Was he waiting for things to cool down? Let me be absolutely clear. There is zero credible evidence that Edgar Allan Poe had anything to do with Mary Rogers' death. Here's why this theory falls apart completely. First, the timeline doesn't work. On July 25, 1841, the day Mary disappeared, Poe was in Philadelphia, not New York. We have documented evidence of his whereabouts. He was working as an editor at Graham's magazine and was dealing with his wife Virginia's declining health. Multiple sources place him in Philadelphia during this period. Second, Poe's inside knowledge came from newspapers. Researchers have tracked down the exact newspaper articles Poe read. Everything in his story came from published accounts. He didn't reveal any information that wasn't already public. What Poe did was synthesize and analyze the information differently than the journalists did, but he didn't have secret knowledge. Third, Poe's obsession with death was literary, not criminal. Yes, Poe wrote about death constantly. You know why. Because death was omnipresent in 19th century life. Tuberculosis, cholera, childbirth complications, people died young and often. Poe's own mother died when he was 2. His foster mother died young. His wife was slowly dying of tuberculosis during the time he wrote Marie Roget. Death wasn't an abstract concept for Poe. It was his lived reality. Writing about it was how he processed trauma, not evidence of homicidal tendencies. Fourth, Poe was not a violent person. There's not a single documented instance of Poe being physically violent toward anyone in his entire life. He was known for being melancholy, sometimes erratic when drinking, and certainly difficult at times, but violent? No evidence whatsoever. Fifth, the conspiracy theory is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Poe's character and method. Poe was a writer obsessed with logic, puzzles, and analysis. The entire point of Marie Roget was to demonstrate that pure reason could solve mysteries. He wasn't hiding guilt, he was showing off his analytical skills. So where did this conspiracy theory come from? Honestly, it's probably a combination of factors. Poe's dark literary reputation, largely undeserved, the public's fascination with true crime, and the tendency to blend fiction with reality when it comes to famous authors. It's the same impulse that makes people think Shakespeare didn't write his plays, or that Agatha Christie was involved in real murders. We project fiction onto reality. So if Poe didn't kill Mary Rogers, who did? The truth is, we still don't know for certain. But the most likely scenario emerged in the months after Poe published his story. In October 1842, just as Poe's story was being serialized, new evidence came to light. A woman named Frederica Loss, who ran an inn near the spot where Mary's body was found in Hoboken, made a deathbed confession. She claimed that on the day Mary disappeared, a young woman matching Mary's description came to her inn with a young man. The woman appeared to be in distress. 1. According to Loss, the woman died at the inn, possibly during a botched abortion procedure. Loss's sons then allegedly dumped the body in the river and staged the scene to look like a murder, scattering Mary's belongings to suggest a violent attack. This theory, that Mary Rogers died during an illegal abortion, actually aligns with some of what Poe theorized in his story. Though he was more circumspect about stating it directly, abortion was not something you openly discussed in 1842. Supporting evidence for the abortion theory. Mary's first disappearance in 1838 may have been for a similar reason. The whispers at the time suggested as much. 2. The timeline makes sense. If Mary was pregnant and seeking an abortion, she would have lied about where she was going. Her aunt wasn't expecting her. 3. Daniel Payne's suicide note takes on new meaning. May God forgive me for my misspent life could be guilt over getting Mary pregnant and the circumstances that led to her death. 4. The physical evidence. While Mary's body showed signs of violence, some of that could have been from a rough abortion procedure and the body being moved and dumped. 5. The social context. In 1841, abortion was illegal and dangerous. Women died from botched procedures regularly. Abortion providers had every incentive to dispose of bodies and cover up deaths. However, not everyone accepts the abortion theory. Some modern researchers believe Mary was indeed murdered, possibly by someone she knew, possibly by a stranger. The violence inflicted on her body was extreme. The ligature around her neck, the bruising, the torn clothing, these all suggest foul play beyond a medical procedure gone wrong. The gang theory has also persisted. Hoboken was a rough area, and there were documented cases of women being assaulted by groups of men in the vicinity around the same time period. The truth is, without modern forensics, without DNA evidence, without professional criminal investigation, we'll never know with certainty what happened to Mary Rogers. What we do know is this. A young woman died violently at age 21. Her death traumatized a city, sparked one of the first true crime media frenzies, and inspired a work of detective fiction that tried and ultimately failed to solve the mystery. The Mystery of Marie Roget is not Poe's best work. It's not even his best detective story. That honor goes to The Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Purloined Letter, the other two stories featuring C. Auguste Dupin. But Marie Roget is significant for several reasons. First, it established the ripped from the headlines genre. Poe was one of the first writers to take a real, contemporary crime and fictionalize it in a way that claimed to offer real insight. This approach would influence countless true crime books, podcasts, and shows down to the present day. Second, it demonstrated both the power and the limitations of armchair detection. Poe genuinely believed that pure logic could solve crimes without physical investigation. He was wrong. As it turned out, his theory, while possibly correct about the abortion, couldn't be proven, and the case remained unsolved. This revealed that detective work requires more than just reasoning. It requires evidence, forensics, and investigation. Third, it shows Poe grappling with real-world tragedy in his fiction. For all his gothic horror and fantastical tales, here was Poe trying to make sense of actual violence, Actual injustice, actual grief. Mary Rogers was a real person who suffered a real death, and Poe, in his way, was trying to honor that by seeking truth. Fourth, it contributed to the development of professional detective work. Poe's detective stories, including Marie Roget, inspired real detectives. Alan Pinkerton, who founded the famous Pinkerton Detective Agency in 1850, was reportedly influenced by Poe's work. Arthur Conan Doyle explicitly credited Poe's duping stories as the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. The Mary Rogers case itself had lasting effects on New York City. It exposed the inadequacy of the police force, contributed to calls for professional law enforcement, and sparked public discourse about women's safety in urban spaces. Mary's death also became a symbol of the dangers faced by the working-class women in the rapidly growing industrial cities of America. Here was a woman who was famous, admired, visible, and yet still vulnerable, still unable to protect herself from violence. As for Edgar Allan Poe, he never successfully solved the Mary Rogers murder, but he didn't need to. His real achievement was creating a literary form, the detective story, that would outlast any single case. When Poe died in 1849, just 8 years after Mary Rogers' death, and 7 years after publishing Marie Roget, both he and Mary had become legends in different ways. She as a victim whose death symbolized urban danger, he as the master of mystery who tried to give her justice through fiction. So, did Edgar Allan Poe murder Mary Rogers? No, absolutely not. The conspiracy theory is baseless, rooted in misunderstanding of both Poe's character and his methods. What Poe did was something different. He tried to use logic and literature to solve a real-world mystery. He failed, but in failing, he created something that would outlast the mystery itself. The detective story as a literary form, and the idea that we can use reason to understand even the darkest corners of human behavior. Mary Rogers' real killer was never found. Her story became a cautionary tale, a mystery, and eventually, a footnote in literary history. But maybe that's not the worst legacy. Mary Rogers, the beautiful cigar girl, is still remembered 180 years after her death. Her story is still told, and in some small way, Poe's attempt to give her justice, however flawed, ensured she wouldn't be forgotten. Sometimes, that's the best we can do. Remember the victims, seek the truth even when we can't find it, and tell the stories that need to be told. If you found this deep dive into one of the 19th century's most fascinating mysteries compelling, please like this video, subscribe for more literary true crime, and let me know in the comments. Did you know about the Mary Rogers case before this? What do you think really happened? Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and keep reading.